the sweaty, boring people have left to watch that game thing, and only the really cool, interesting people are left. Cool, interesting people, please come and sit in the first 3 rows, because it's a bit ridiculous. I'm not expecting you all to snuggle up. Can we turn off that aircon unit? Because they're not going to move until... there's another aircon unit here. There's another one right here. So you could come and sit in the back row here, honestly. And people here, again, if you could come this way, there is actually aircon. You can see where the aircon units are. If you want to sit yourselves in line with those, I think that's an acceptable compromise. But you have to feel for our next speaker, who was scheduled before anyone had the remotest idea that England would get this far. And is therefore there going, what? These British are crazy. Why are they all watching that instead of hearing about this really important subject? So people on, you see, you're sitting right by the aircon unit, aren't they? Could you compromise and come 1 row forward, people at the back row? They are melting. Okay, people who just come in, you must come and sit near the front. Come and sit on the front row here. Not just because you're late, but just because it's polite to the speaker. It's good. He wants to look at people's face. We've just spent half a day here hearing how important it is that we connect with each other face to face. And now you're sitting at the back in the dark. It's the hypocrisy that gets me, quite frankly. You sit in the back. I can barely see you. Come and sit forward. Yes, you. I'm going to pick on you individually. You're not even sitting by the aircon unit. You have literally no excuse at all. Okay, right, it's enough ranting at you. Because what I'm now doing is I'm eating into the time. And we're already tight for time because our next speaker was really keen to make this an actual conversation and therefore to take questions using the Slido system. Slido.com, #FutureFest, Envision stage. Yeah, whatever you do, don't actually send your questions to the wrong stage. That would be all we need right now. So you can submit your questions as we go through, and what I'll do is I'll field them at the end. Excellent. Please, people coming in, please come and sit near the front so the speaker can see you in the eyes and make human contact. So, okay, our next speaker is a cyborg rights activist, a designer and developer, and co-founder at ind.ie. So please, muster up your kind of languid enthusiasm and make some noise and excitement to welcome Aral Balkan.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sadly, I won't be talking about anything half as important as football, but thank you for showing up anyway. This is the middle of 2018. There are certain things that we have to take as given. For instance, that one man today has more intimate information about more people in the world than anyone has ever had in the history of mankind. And that man's company is currently employing 60 people to literally read your mind. And that's because the business model of this company is surveillance. Here's how it works. Facebook has 2 audiences, users and their customers. And they profile and track their users, and they monetize that information with their customers. This is not a mistake. This is systemic. This is the Silicon Valley model. This is how venture capital and the startup ecosystem works. We call it surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism is about the feedback loop between surveillance and capitalism. Capitalism is about the accrual of wealth. Surveillance is about the accrual of information. What happens when people who have accrued wealth and power then spend that wealth and invest it in devices of surveillance, which then leads them to gather information about us, which then leads them to manipulate our behavior, which then leads to more accumulation of wealth and power? Well, we get surveillance capitalism, where the criteria of success is infinite, rapid growth, which, as we know, of course, is a recipe for madness. It is also the success criteria of cancer. This is how tumors work, when they forget their actual function and start growing at all costs. And the success criteria there is, of course, the death of the host. Thankfully, we're not leading in Europe in surveillance capitalism. China is. They have invented a social credit score, so if you don't toe the party line literally online, you might not get a loan or your business might suffer. We're trying to catch up. Facebook has a patent on trying to do the same thing. But we are still feeling the ramifications of this in the West with, for example, the election of Trump and with Brexit. So that's the problem. If we're going to fix it, though, we have to agree on some fundamentals before we move on. One, this is a problem of centralization of wealth and power. Today, all of our technologies, whether they're smart televisions, TVs, watches, cars, pills, they all work the same way by gathering information, data about us. This is not the problem. This is a fact of life. This is how modern technology works. We're not going to change this. The question is who owns and controls this data and insight into our lives. Is it us? No problem. That's a democracy. Is it corporations? A handful? And is this information then made available to governments as well? Then we have a very different social system we're talking about. We're talking about corporatocracy. And that's where we are today. We're not sleepwalking into a dystopia. We are in the middle of it. Two, this is about loss of personhood, and it's inextricably linked to data. What is data? Data is information, right? But we use this generic term when we're talking about information about rocks, as well as when we're talking about information about people, which I find very odd because I cannot incarcerate a rock. I cannot deprive a rock of its life. I cannot emotionally or physically hurt a rock. And yet we're making policies where we're using data as a generic term. Who gets the short end of that stick? Is it the rock or is it the person? I think it's the person. But what is data about people, then, if it's so important that we safeguard and protect it? Let me give you an analogy. What if I had a statue instead, a small statuette in my hand? If I take a 3D printer and gather a 3D scanner and gather data about this statuette, I can take a 3D printer and create an almost exact replica of it. I want you to think, what can I do if I have enough data about you? And I'll let you know, I don't want to 3D print you. But I do want a valuable proxy that I can use to manipulate your behavior. And I'm never going to sell it. I might rent access to it, but it's too valuable. You're too valuable for me to sell. So this is about personhood and how we define the boundaries of the self. Because today, we define them at our biological boundaries. And we have, over the years, built a system of laws and governance and a judiciary system that protects the boundaries and the integrity of the self. We call it human rights law. What happens, though, when your smart device comes into the question? What is our relationship with our smart devices? Is it a conversation? I have an idea. I don't want to store it just in my head, so I go, hey, phone, write this down for me. My phone says, yeah, sure, I've noted it. If this is our relationship, then what is surveillance? What it's always been, since the days of the Stasi, signals capture between two actors having a conversation. But what if our relationship to technology is different? What if I have an idea, and what I'm doing by storing it on my phone is extending my mind, and thereby extending myself using this device? Then it would make perfect sense to extend our understanding of the boundaries of the self to include the devices, the technologies by which we extend ourselves. At which point, what does surveillance become? An abuse of the self. And we already have a series of laws and justice that knows how to deal with abuses of the self and prevent them. We call it human rights law. So we don't need a new digital Bill of Rights. We need to apply the human rights we already have to an extended idea of the self that includes all aspects of ourselves in the digital networked era, because we are sharded beings and we are unable today to protect some of those shards. We need to agree on some principles going forward. One, our data and technology is part of who we are. Two, data about individuals must belong to individuals. Three, data about the commons must belong to the commons. So then we can move on to talking about the solutions. How do we move from surveillance capitalism to this utopic future that we want to live in, where we have human rights and democracy? Well, both of these places exist today. The problem isn't that one doesn't exist. The problem is they are separated by a sea, and only the best swimmers can get from one island to the other, those with technical knowledge. A lot of these are not issues for people with technical knowledge. The question is, how do we build a convenient bridge between those two islands so that those who aren't experts swimmers can join us as well? So let's make a plan. How do we do this? Two things. We must regulate and we must replace. Regulate the surveillance capitalists to reduce their abuses. We're not doing a good job of this because the European parliamentarians who are supposed to be regulating are taking selfies with the people they're supposed to be regulating. Because we have the influence of corporate finance corrupting our institutions, lobbying and revolving doors, public-private partnerships, multi-stakeholderism, co-regulation. Let's call all of these things what they are: institutional corruption. So if we're going to regulate effectively, then we must first combat institutional corruption. We must learn to identify also the doctors in the cigarette ads of our industry. Who are the organizations that tell you that they care about these things and yet get all their money from surveillance capitalists? I'm talking about Mozilla. Who are the organizations that say they care about human rights and yet they are partners with and get sponsored by surveillance capitalists like Google and Facebook? I'm talking about Access Now. Who are the organizations that appear to be what they are not, like Singularity University, which is not a university? I don't even know how they can call themselves a university. I mean, do we not have advertising laws in Europe? They are a public relations lobbying arm of Silicon Valley. They have the Danish Prime Minister's ear, and they are affecting policy. Denmark just appointed an ambassador to Silicon Valley. A democratically elected government just enacted an ambassador to a series of corporations, giving up the only leverage it actually has. We do have progress. GDPR is great, but we need to go beyond regulating data to regulating algorithms. What's done with the data? We need algorithmic transparency. So that's technological, that's legislative regulation. We also need technological regulation. That's part of what we do at my not-for-profit. With Laura, we build a free and open source tool that blocks trackers from surveillance capitalists like Google and Facebook when you're browsing the web. And then we need to replace them. But these alternatives are not going to grow on trees. They're not going to sprout magically from the ground. We must fund them. If we want technology for the commons, we must fund it from the commons. Venture capitalists are not going to fund the alternatives. I'm talking not about startups. I'm talking about stay-ups. Let's build technology differently so it's sustainable. And please understand that I am not talking about blockchain oil salespeople either. Right? Blockchain is not a prerequisite for a decentralized future. It is a libertarian masturbation fantasy. So, not blockchain. I'm talking about ethical technology, which is ethically designed technology. And ethical design is not hard as a concept. It revolves around respect for three things. At its core, respect for human rights, respect for human efforts so that the things we make are convenient to use, and respect for human experience so that they are delightful and beautiful and add to people's lives. This is ethical design. The problem with the mainstream today is that we build things that abuse human rights at their core. But we care about human effort and we care about human experience because what we're trying to do is to hide an unethical, putrid core. Because if people saw that and smelt it and tasted it, they'd never eat that apple. So we need to make it taste good and look good. So we do care about human effort, user experience design, right? And human experience. We need to hide the unethical core. So if you want to learn more about that, indie/ethical design. A friend of mine, Trina Falbe, has written a great book called White Hat UX, in which she talks about it, and she's written articles as well. And there are companies like Purism that build full-stack consumer devices, laptops, and they're now building a phone as well. The hardware is free and open, the software, the services are free and open, and they've adopted the Ethical Design Manifesto. In building the phone, I was talking to Francois, their lead designer, and they are now adopting a move away from apps so that we can remove the functionality from the data and make sure the data is yours, and that you can just add functionality, features, instead of apps. So that's very exciting. But we have to realize that ethical technologies are designed by ethically designed organizations. It starts with the design of the organization. So Laura and I, for example, don't have any venture capital. If we did, if we ever take venture capital, don't listen to another word I say. I've been corrupted, right? And what are the kind of solutions we're working on because of how our organization is designed? Well, we want to build a future where everyone owns and controls their own place on the internet. And it is this place that all of these smart things that you own connect to, not to the Googles, not to the Facebooks, not to the Amazons. And these are not places that you have to have technical knowledge in order to maintain, because they're interoperable. Lots of organizations can host these places for you. And we started working on this with the city of Ghent at the end of last year, starting with a city at the city level. What if we gave everyone at the city their own place that they owned and controlled, and they could talk privately with each other, and they could also interact with the city? This place is basically, it looks like a website, right? But how do we get them on there? That's one of the biggest questions, right? Experience-wise. How do we get you started with this? Because what we're competing with is this 30-second sign-up form on Facebook, right? Unless we can compete with this, we're screwed. And the current experience, if you want your own place, is, oh, you register a domain name, and then you get a server, and then you install some app on it, and the three of us that do this, think that it's cool, but this is not what people are going to do. That's why we started working with Ghent. They have their own top-level domain, so we could actually integrate it. So we built a prototype called hello.ghent, where the assumption was that we would send people codes, and the codes would be currency, basically, allowing them to sign up for their own domain name, which the city would sponsor from the commons for the common good. And we built this really smooth experience where they would be asked to select the domain name, and then they would be led through a process of customizing their own site. The site they went to would start morphing into their own site. And while they're doing this, in the background, we're trying as hard as we can to register that domain name with our own top-level domain and get their actual site ready, right? So they're customizing it. They're, okay, great, let's do this. And they go back, and there it says, is your domain ready? It is. All right, let's go to your site, the place you own on the internet, and then you can start publicly posting things, or you can start talking to people privately. And this looks like a website, but it's a special website because you can follow other people's websites. And it's part of an interoperable system called, it uses a protocol called ActivityPub, so you can also follow Mastodon users, for example. And it's interesting because for the first time, the mainstream started, kind of taking an interest. We had Wired, New Scientist kind of writing about the efforts, actually seeing the word surveillance capitalism in The Guardian and other newspapers for the first time. It's been very interesting. There's a shift since Cambridge Analytica, right? And of course, with all of this stuff and the prototype up and running, we got our budget cut. So that's where we are right now. And Indie, of course, we're continuing to work on this project with the personal website side of it. And we're starting by making it offline first. The web today is client and server, and this is the architecture that has led to the surveillance capitalism that we have today. When Tim designed the web 25, 30 years ago, he couldn't have foreseen this necessarily. Hindsight is 2020. He wanted a free and open system that was read-write. He designed one where we have servers and clients connect to servers. And the problem is that means the server is a privileged node. And those servers, if you put this system into an enzymatic vat of venture capital, those servers are incentivized to grow as quickly as they can. Those servers become the Googles and Facebooks. And they become the new mainframes. The web is the mainframe 2.0 era. But what we're working on is based on synchronization and replication. What if every node was equal in the network topology? So there were really no servers. Maybe you had an always-on node that you didn't manage. That really helps with being able to find you and to send you messages even if all your devices are offline. But what if that was not very privileged at all? What if the data existed on all of your nodes at the same time? And to do this, we're using a beautiful protocol called DAT. Go to datproject.org if you want to learn more about it. It's already being used to share data sets in a peer-to-peer fashion. And we're layering this on top of the current web. I call this project Haifa. We haven't even started talking publicly about it. It's the first time I've mentioned the name. And it comes from mycelia, which is very interesting, the mycelium networks that exist under trees and the way that they work. Look into that. It's fascinating. But I already started playing with it. So my own blog, I remade it over a weekend using some of these technologies so that it's accessible from the web, but it's also on the peer web using DAT. What does that mean? So here's an experience. Right now, this is just a toy for me, right? So I blog using Visual Studio Code. I don't expect you to do that. But here we have 3 different browsers, and they're peer-to-peer browsers. Look, I'm going into the peer-to-peer version and turning on Live Reload. It's called Beaker Browser. The 4th browser there is Safari, good old-fashioned web browser. And I've just created a new post on my blog. And on the peer-to-peer browsers, it's streaming in. And these are not local on my machine. These are accessing the live site. So if 1,000 people were accessing the site at that point, they would see the new blog post pop up. And every time I save, they would see the changes. So let's say I was live blogging. Because it's a peer-to-peer streaming experience that they're having. I'm dragging a photo in. I'm going to put the photo in using Markdown into my post. And it's going to get streaming updates to all of the peer-to-peer ones. With the old web, the current web, I have to refresh it. That's one advantage that we have. That is streaming updates. So there you go. The other advantage, well, how do you reach this site? It's got a DAT URL. Instead of HTTPS, you go to DAT live URL with a browser that supports it, currently only Beaker. But it's also got a name mapping so that you can go to the HTTPS and it knows where the P2P is. But it maps to this actual address. That's the actual address of my blog. And this is an address that you can't censor. Because if 1,000 people have actually downloaded the site or the article, then they're all serving it as well. It's peer-to-peer. So this is what I call Web Plus. We're not going to go directly to P2P necessarily, but we can layer it on top of the web. We can use things like DAT. We can use technologies like Scuttlebutt and ActivityPub, and even OpenNIC, which is a domain name system that is not owned and controlled by a centralized entity. And this is how we can go from surveillance capitalism to this kind of utopic future that already exists from the web to peer web by building this bridge, which is Web Plus. What we're really building are the training wheels of the peer web that we need for a democratic future. That's what we're building with this project, and I hope that that's what some of you will help us build for the future of humanity. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Lots and lots to think about there. So we are, we're just going to take a few minutes for questions.
Can I answer one that I see right there?
Yeah, if that's true. I don't know why I'm standing here with this.
No, that's quite okay. That's okay.
You answer whichever question.
Just the top one is a very interesting
I'll just stand here
one.
and nod. Go for it.
No. Let's. So how do you see us striking the right balance between privacy and public security? Well, I see that as a false dichotomy. There is no trade-off between these two things. So just because you have the human right of privacy, which is basically to say you have the right to decide what you share with others and what you keep to yourself, doesn't make anyone less secure. What that's assuming is that somehow mass surveillance makes us more secure, and nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, if you're looking at what makes us and keeps us secure, it's local policing, that thing that we're actually defunding. That's what keeps us secure from terrorism, etc., not mass surveillance, not a bunch of corporations or the government knowing everything about everyone. That's what leads to authoritarian regimes. Did you want to take some other questions from there?
Well, they're the same. I have a small pad with the same questions that are on the
Okay,
screen.
all right. Let's see. What
kind
about
of redundancy? So, I mean, I think how does what you're doing differ from other decentralization efforts?
Right. There are lots of overlaps. We're using, right now, we've started using the DApp project, the DApp protocol. And I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to start focusing some of these efforts around some of these technologies. Those of us building these alternatives, by our very nature, kind of have this thing of doing things differently from everyone else. But I think now is the time to pick a few things and start building larger and more convenient experiences on top of them. So we are using a lot of the other things. So ActivityPub is one that we're going to be layering on. DAT is what we're using. And where it differs from everything else is I see this as that bridge. So I don't want to go full peer-to-peer web or full peer-to-peer because that has a I hate the word user, we're people. That has experience challenges, right? It has, if you don't have an always-on node, then you can't compete on findability. So how do I reach you if your devices are offline? And you can't compete on availability. So what if your devices do go offline? So with an always-on node, you can do that. And that's the bit that I think is missing in some of the others. I think we're going too quickly to, oh, here's the ideal solution. I do this all the time. Because you can see it, and you're like, why isn't everyone here? They can't get there. They're trying. They can't get there. So that's it. How can we help you build Haifa? Talk to me afterwards.
I was just thinking that. Okay, talk to him afterwards. So we've probably got time for...
Oh, can I take that one as well? What are realistic business models to support these ethical approaches? One, let's think about funding them from the commons. We are already using European taxpayer money to fund startups, Silicon Valley-style startups. What happens? If they fail, the European taxpayer foots the bill. If they succeed, they usually get bought by surveillance capitalists like Google and Facebook. So in Europe today, we're acting like an unpaid research and development department for Silicon Valley. Let's stop doing that. Let's start investing commons money, your taxpayer money, in commons organizations that build products for the common good. Let's start doing that. Let's start investing in stay-ups, not startups, without exits. Right? We can still have investment opportunities where you get a share of revenue, maybe. Not the exit. The exit is where you lose control. The exit is part of the problem that we need to fix.
That kind of answers that other question about, what about VCs that promise not to exit? Are they any better? That kind of answers that, doesn't it?
Yeah, because, I mean, there is so much BS around it. Look, VC, venture capital, gave us surveillance capitalism, right? They're not going to create the disease and give you the actual cure. You know, they might give you something that masks the symptoms, maybe, but they're not going to cure what makes them their billions today.
And finally, I think just about got time to answer, is blockchain snake oil? Or is it just some of the advocates of blockchain that are snake oil salesmen?
No, blockchain is not all snake oil. Only 99.59% of it is snake oil, right? And here's the thing. DAT, I talked about the DAT protocol. DAT is built on the same technologies. We're talking about directed acyclic graphs and Merkle trees and public key cryptography. The bit it doesn't have, the bit that I called the libertarian, masturbation fantasy, is the get-rich-quick scheme of I want to have my cryptocurrency attached, do my initial coin offering, and become a millionaire. No, you have the wrong idea, right? If any of us who are trying to solve this problem, if any of our solutions end up making us billionaires, we failed. We have done something fundamentally wrong and ended up perpetuating this current system. Right? None of what I'm talking about is going to make any of us billionaires because the existence of billionaires is part of the problem. That is part of the centralization that we are trying to cure.
And that's a fantastic note to end the session on. You can rate it on Slido if you want to, again, reduce us to some mere digits in somebody else's metrication scheme. You can also visit Black Box Bellagio, which is the data casino where you gamble with your own personal data. I don't know if you've visited that yet. And I've been asked to also mention Nesta's program, Next Generation Internet, which is focused on creating a more inclusive, human-centric and resilient internet. I don't know if you're involved in that. Sounds like they want to poach you if you're not.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see. So see Aral afterwards if you want to help him build Haifa. And meanwhile, please thank him enormously and then rush out of the room and stand somewhere cooler for 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.